Why has Batman been the star of some of the most celebrated video games in history, while Superman, despite his legendary status, has struggled to make his mark in the same medium? Both are cultural icons. Both have been the face of blockbuster movies, comic books, and toys. Yet, when it comes to video games, the Dark Knight consistently outshines the Man of Steel. Is it simply a matter of gameplay mechanics? Of bad luck? Or is there something deeper at play, something rooted in psychology, storytelling, and even the industry itself? This video takes a deep dive into the reasons behind this curious imbalance. We'll explore how Batman's psychological depth lends itself to immersive gameplay. We'll examine how Superman's near invincibility actually creates design problems. We'll unpack how the video game industry evaluates financial risk differently depending on the character. And finally, we'll explore a fascinating aspect of player psychology: the need for identification, tension, and vulnerability. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Batman has been the perfect character for video game masterpieces like Arkham Asylum and Arkham City, while Superman remains a challenge that even the best studios haven't quite cracked. This isn't just a comparison between two superheroes, it's a journey into what makes a video game work, how stories are told interactively, and why, in the end, the shadow is often more interesting than the light. Batman is not just a superhero, he's a wounded man, a detective, and a relentless strategist. And that psychological complexity is precisely what makes him such a compelling protagonist for video games. While many superheroes rely on overwhelming power, Batman is grounded in limitation. His strength doesn't come from superhuman abilities, but from training, intelligence, technology, and above all, trauma. This combination gives game developers a rich canvas to explore mechanics of stealth, investigation, combat, and moral ambiguity. From the moment players slip into the cape and cowl, they're not embodying an invincible being, they're becoming a man fighting both crime and his own demons. That duality makes the Batman experience deeply immersive. Every gadget, every shadowy takedown, every clue analyzed in detective mode reinforces the player's connection to a very human character. This isn't about smashing everything in your path, it's about understanding fear, controlling it, and using it strategically. The Arkham series, especially Arkham Asylum and Arkham City, perfectly captured that essence. The game design mirrors Batman's own way of thinking: meticulous, patient, methodical. Enemies are rarely approached head-on. Instead, you stalk them from the shadows, plan your attack, isolate threats. It feels like chess with fists and grappling hooks. And the emotional tone, the constant darkness, the twisted villains, the decaying city makes every moment feel like a psychological trial. The game world itself is a reflection of Batman's inner chaos. Moreover, Batman's rogues gallery isn't just iconic, it's deeply psychological. Villains like the Joker, Scarecrow, or Two-Face don't just threaten Gotham physically, they challenge Batman morally and mentally. These confrontations translate into some of the most innovative game mechanics ever created. Think of the Scarecrow sequences in Arkham Asylum, where hallucinations break the fourth wall, forcing the player to question reality just as Batman does. It's a gameplay manifestation of trauma and fear, pure genius. Batman's psychology also opens the door to progression-based systems. Since he's not overpowered, he must grow. His skill tree makes narrative sense. You upgrade gadgets because he's a tech genius. You learn combat combos because he's constantly training. Unlike Superman, whose powers are virtually maxed out from the start, Batman's evolution feels earned. That sense of growth is crucial to modern game design. It creates satisfaction, investment, and replayability. Another vital point: Batman fits naturally into modern open-world formulas. Gotham is not just a setting, it's an extension of the character. Patrolling rooftops, intercepting crimes in progress, solving side quests, these aren't just tasks, they're part of the fantasy of being Batman. And because his world is built on realism, albeit stylized, players don't feel the dissonance of being too powerful for the stakes. When Batman intervenes in a robbery or dismantles a militia camp, it feels proportionate to his role. There's tension, challenge, and stakes. Contrast that with other superheroes who can fly, shoot lasers, or are invulnerable. Those abilities often require either huge, destructible environments or contrived limits to maintain balance. With Batman, the stakes are always personal. He's saving a city he's emotionally tied to. He doesn't just fight crime, he obsesses over it, studies it, and suffers for it. That narrative weight is easy to translate into missions and emotional arcs. In the end, Batman is the perfect intersection between vulnerability and power. He invites players not just to act, but to think, feel, and investigate. His psyche becomes a playground for game designers, a man haunted by guilt, driven by justice, isolated by choice. These traits mirror what many gamers unconsciously seek: agency in a hostile world, the chance to master chaos with precision and determination. This is why Batman works so well in video games. He's not a god. He's not perfect. He's a man in pain with a purpose, fighting in the shadows. And that makes all the difference. Superman is, in theory, the ultimate video game fantasy. Flight, super strength, laser vision, invulnerability. He's a god in a cape. But that very perfection is also what makes him so difficult to translate into an engaging gameplay experience. When you play as Superman, you don't just control a hero, you control a myth, a symbol, a flawless icon. And that leaves very little room for the fundamental pillars of good game design: challenge, vulnerability, and progression. Let's be clear, Superman is a great character in storytelling. His struggle isn't physical, it's moral, emotional, existential. He's the last son of a dead planet trying to live among fragile humans. He's a symbol of hope burdened with immense responsibility. But those internal conflicts are hard to gamify. Unlike Batman, Superman rarely operates in the shadows or investigates clues. He reacts to large-scale threats, moves at supersonic speed, and solves problems that would destroy entire cities. Translating that into gameplay often results in either boring invincibility or artificial restrictions that feel like betrayals of who he is. And that's the heart of the Superman dilemma in games: balance. If you make him too powerful, there's no tension, no risk, no challenge. If you nerf him, players instantly feel that something's off. Why can't he fly here? Why do bullets hurt? Why can't he see through walls? The suspension of disbelief breaks instantly because Superman is not supposed to have limits. Players feel it, and it kills immersion. Game developers have tried various approaches. Superman 64 notoriously failed because it tried to force Superman into arbitrary constraints like flying through rings. Other games have made him playable only in segments, or weakened him with kryptonite to justify difficulty spikes. But these tactics feel cheap. They don't solve the core issue. Superman's powers are too broad and absolute to fit into the structure of most action-adventure games. There's also a narrative challenge. What kind of enemies do you pit against a god? Random thugs? They pose zero threat. Robots? Aliens? Kryptonian clones? It quickly becomes repetitive or absurd. And even if you introduce powerful enemies like Darkseid or Brainiac, you run into another problem: stakes inflation. The world is always ending. There's no room for small stories, street-level drama, or intimate choices. And that's precisely what modern gamers often crave: a sense of grounded consequence. Progression systems become equally problematic. How do you level up Superman? He doesn't learn to fly or gain new strength. He already has it all. Giving him a skill tree feels forced, and taking away powers just to earn them back destroys the fantasy. Unlike Batman, who logically improves through tech and training, Superman has no plausible growth arc in gameplay terms unless it's tied to storytelling gimmicks. Even the open-world concept gets tricky. What's the point of side quests when you can move faster than sound and solve global crises? Why would Superman stop a mugging when he can hear an earthquake on the other side of the planet? The moment you introduce Superman's full abilities, the entire world around him has to scale up. And very few development studios can handle that kind of cosmic narrative and mechanical complexity. Another issue: Superman's personality is not conducive to morally ambiguous gameplay. He's the Boy Scout, the golden standard. He doesn't kill, doesn't torture, doesn't manipulate. This moral rigidity, while admirable in fiction, severely limits player agency. Games often thrive on giving players difficult choices, gray areas, and freedom. Batman can break bones and intimidate. Kratos can rage and destroy. Even Spider-Man can let a thug go or web him to a wall. Superman's code of ethics makes that kind of interactive tension hard to justify. You're either good, or you're not Superman. Of course, none of this means a Superman game is impossible. It just means it requires a completely different design philosophy. One that leans into his internal struggles, into rescue missions, into impossible moral dilemmas rather than combat and power fantasy. But so far, very few studios have been willing or able to take that risk. In essence, Superman is too perfect. His lack of fear, his nearly infinite power, his moral clarity, all of these traits make him inspiring as a myth, but unrelatable as a game character. Because video games don't thrive on perfection. They thrive on struggle, evolution, and imperfection. Batman embodies that to his core. Superman does not. That's why we remember the Arkham games and not Superman Returns the game. One is about trauma, shadows, and growth. The other is about being a flawless god in a broken world with nothing to fear and nothing left to prove. Creating a compelling Superman game isn't just a psychological or narrative challenge. It's a monumental game design paradox. On paper, he seems like the perfect sandbox character. He can fly, shoot lasers, lift mountains, and save entire cities. But as soon as developers try to systematize those powers into mechanics, everything breaks down. Why? Because Superman defies the very structure of how games are typically built. Let's start with the most obvious issue: scale. Superman's powers demand a level of environmental interaction that surpasses almost any modern game engine. If Superman is flying at Mach speeds, the city below must render seamlessly and at vast distances. If he can punch through buildings, those buildings need to be destructible, and the world needs to react accordingly. If he has super hearing and X-ray vision, the world needs to be fully populated, not with cardboard NPCs, but with actual lives worth saving. That's a technological nightmare even for ADA studios. This leads to a crucial constraint: faking Superman's powers. Most developers are forced to simulate his abilities in limited scopes. For example, you might let him fly, but restrict altitude or speed. You might allow strength, but only in pre-scripted set pieces. But the more you restrict him, the more you undermine the fantasy. Players notice, and they ask, why am I Superman if I can't do Superman things? That's a death sentence in immersion. Compare that to Batman. In the Arkham series, the game systems are brilliantly crafted around his limitations: stealth over brute force, gadgets over powers, investigation over omniscience. His lack of superpowers is a feature, not a bug. It defines the game loop. Every enemy is a threat. Every fight is a puzzle. Every room is a challenge. With Superman, the natural tension is absent. You need to invent obstacles that feel artificial or forced. Another issue is enemy design. For most characters, developers can scale threats easily: stronger enemies, better AI, more health, more numbers. For Superman, it's not that simple. How do you create a threat that makes players feel pressure when you're controlling an invincible being? Endless waves of robots? Magic? Kryptonite-enhanced enemies? These feel gimmicky when overused. They often become repetitive and, worse, predictable. And when threat becomes predictable, boredom follows. Worse, Superman doesn't just overpower enemies, he outpaces them. In many action games, spacing, timing, and positioning create engagement. Think of Spider-Man dodging attacks midair or Kratos chaining combos. But with Superman, movement is instant. Strength is overwhelming. The power curve is flat, you're maxed out from minute 1. The game can't naturally escalate unless it breaks its own logic. There's also the problem of content density. In an open world, Superman should be able to go from one continent to another in seconds. But no studio can populate an entire planet with meaningful content. You either have an empty world or you limit Superman's range again, undermining the core fantasy. You can't put Superman in a box and expect players not to notice the cage. Let's talk systems. Health bars, stamina, inventory. Do these even make sense for Superman? Giving him a health bar is absurd unless you constantly expose him to kryptonite. Giving him stamina implies he can get tired, which breaks the fantasy. Giving him weapons or gear contradicts his nature, so you're left designing an entire interface that feels alien to modern game design. You can't lean on the usual tropes. Even quest design becomes problematic. Superman's morality doesn't allow for much variety in player behavior. He won't accept money. He won't ignore a cry for help. He won't make a selfish choice. That means branching dialogue, moral systems, or open-ended decision trees mechanics that enhance replayability are severely limited. Superman always does the right thing. That's inspiring, but it's terrible for interactive variety. Some might argue for a Metroidvania approach. Start Superman weakened and let him slowly regain powers. But that feels artificial. Fans don't want to play a powerless Clark Kent for 10 hours, they want to be Superman. And yet, the moment you grant them full access, the sandbox collapses. Contrast that with Spider-Man 2 or Arkham Knight, where traversal and combat evolve gradually. Those games thrive on the player mastering tools over time. With Superman, there are no tools, just raw, godlike power from the start. That eliminates one of game design's most satisfying loops: the sensation of becoming more powerful. When you start at 100%, where do you go? So, the real question becomes, should Superman even be the main playable character? Maybe he works better as a mentor, a god-tier ally, or even a background threat. Perhaps the key is to build a world around Superman, rather than force players to inhabit his skin. Because unless a studio completely rethinks how games are built from UI to AI to world systems, Superman may forever remain incompatible with traditional gameplay structures. In the end, the paradox is this: the more faithfully you try to represent Superman, the more you break game design. And the more you fix the design, the more you break Superman. While psychology and game design explain part of the story, there's another layer behind Batman's domination in the gaming world: pure industry logic. In the end, publishers and studios don't just follow fan dreams, they follow money, marketability, risk assessment, and franchise compatibility. And in that sense, Batman has always been the safer, smarter, and more scalable choice than Superman. Let's start with IP flexibility. Batman's world is rich, modular, and endlessly adaptable. Gotham is a confined but dense playground, perfect for designers to build vertical levels, tight combat arenas, and stealth zones. You can turn Batman into a detective, a brawler, a ninja, a strategist, or a horror survival protagonist. His universe allows for multiple genres, tones, and mechanics without ever breaking character. From a development standpoint, that's gold. Superman, on the other hand, is rigid. His stories are cosmic or apocalyptic. You either go big interplanetary wars, gods, or timelines, or go boring, rescuing cats from trees and stopping bank robbers. There's little in between. And the more epic you go, the more expensive the game becomes. It's no coincidence that Hollywood also struggles with standalone Superman films while Batman reboots flourish. Next, tone and audience targeting. Batman has the dark edge that appeals to teens and adults alike. He fits perfectly in a post-Arkham or Last of Us world, where gritty realism sells. He can be grounded in noir, elevated in fantasy or stylized in comic book flair. That tonal flexibility makes him adaptable to global audiences and mature storytelling. Superman, however, is difficult to modernize without betraying his essence. Studios that try to make him darker risk alienating core fans. Those that keep him wholesome are accused of being cheesy or outdated. It's a tonal trap. In the current gaming industry, where story-driven, emotionally complex titles dominate, Superman is harder to place. His moral purity feels out of step with a market driven by moral ambiguity. Then comes the budget question. A Superman game, if done properly, would likely cost upward of $150 to $200 million. Why? Because you'd need cutting-edge world simulation, advanced AI for civilians and enemies, dynamic destruction systems, custom physics for flight, and voice acting for thousands of interactions. That's before you start talking about marketing. Batman, meanwhile, has proven to deliver critical and commercial success with more traditional tools. The Arkham series reused assets, used Metroidvania structures, and focused on polishing mechanics rather than building new tech from scratch. For publishers, that's a safer bet. Less innovation, more iteration. And that leads us to risk management. No studio wants to be the one that botches a Superman game, especially after the infamously mocked Superman 64. The pressure is immense, the expectations astronomical. Fans want emotional depth and full power fantasy? That's a high bar. A failed Batman game? Disappointing. A failed Superman game? Career-ending. Let's not forget licensing. Warner Bros. Owns both Batman and Superman, but historically it has invested more heavily in Batman projects, film, animation, and merchandise because of the consistent ROI. Studios pitching a Batman game have data to support profitability. Superman pitches don't have the same track record, making approvals harder and development timelines longer. And finally, there's the team dynamic. Batman can work solo or with sidekicks, creating opportunities for co-op or multiple playable characters. His universe includes Nightwing, Batgirl, Robin, Red Hood, all of whom can support spin-offs, DLCs, or even full sequels. This creates a franchise model that's sustainable and expandable. Superman? Not so much. His allies are usually gods or aliens, too powerful or too obscure for mainstream appeal. You can't easily create a super family game without confusing the core audience or diluting the brand. That's not just a creative issue, it's a business one. In short, Batman is a perfect convergence of business logic and creative opportunity. He's scalable, bankable, flexible, and culturally iconic. Superman, by contrast, is conceptually grand, but logistically fragile. Until a studio is willing to burn a fortune and rewrite the rulebook, Batman will remain the king of superhero gaming, not because he's better on paper, but because he fits the industry's needs far more precisely. When we step back and examine the full picture, the contrast between Batman and Superman in the video game world isn't just a fluke, it's a mirror reflecting the psychology of players, the logic of game design, and the hard realities of the gaming industry. Batman thrives not because he's the most powerful, but because he's the most adaptable. His darkness, his trauma, his limitations, they don't hold him back. They make him playable. They turn him into a challenge, a fantasy, and a metaphor all at once. Superman, despite being one of the most iconic heroes in history, remains shackled by his own perfection. His moral clarity, his godlike powers, and his symbolic role as humanity's beacon make him inspiring, but not interactive. Games are about obstacles, weaknesses, choices, and Superman, paradoxically, lacks the very flaws that would make him compelling in a controller's hands. This isn't a critique of the character, but a reflection of medium compatibility. What works in comics or cinema doesn't always translate to gameplay. Until a studio finds the perfect formula or dares to reinvent Superman from the ground up, he will remain a myth too big for a joystick. Meanwhile, Batman, flawed, human, tormented, will keep gliding over Gotham's rooftops, punching crime in the shadows and proving, time and time again, that when it comes to gaming, mortality makes the legend.